Thank you very much for inviting me to the conference. Before I start my speech, I have to say that the topic of New Age reception in Soviet popular cinema, I must express in the word popular cinema, is very, let me say, narrow and very small. Last year in the conference in Riga, I had a big report about the image of the priest in Soviet cinema, image of priest and the church in Soviet popular cinema. Today, my topic is much less pictured. That's why it's very hard to write the big article about it. And I found this conference a very good occasion to make my short speech and maybe hear your opinion about the perspective of this topic. Okay, let me start. Vladimir Lenin once appealed to the Commissar of Education, Anatoly Lunacharsky. You are known among us as a protector of the arts, so you must remember that of all the arts, for us, the cinema is the most important. There is a version of this appeal, for us the cinema and the circus are the most important, but there are no evidences of the word circus. And really, I speak the cinema, I'm sorry, during Soviet history, the cinema was the most popular, mass, and beloved of the arts. For instance, in the 1970s, the annual production of films in the USSR was about 270 feature films in the year annually, of which about more than 100 were ordered by the TV and 2,000 documentaries annually. More than half of them were created at the Republica, not all unions film studios like Ukrainian, Uzbekistan, Moldova, etc. Cinema attendance in the 70s was about 4 billion viewers per year, while population in the Soviet Union was about 280 million of people. 4 billion viewers per year in cinemas. In my report, I specifically paid my attention to the period, when the Soviet cinematography was most strikingly different from the other periods. That's a period of stagnation, middle 60s, middle 80s. It can be considered the heyday of the Soviet cinematography, and that's when the topic of spirituality, religion, was neither taboo as before, nor in special favor as later during the perestroika. Also, I tried to draw my attention primarily to films where anti-religious propaganda or anti-New Age propaganda was not the main goal of the director. In such movies, I was interested in two questions at once: how the director, how the author, how the screenwriters have shown religion, and how it should be interpreted by the viewer, by the Soviet people. I excluded the adaptation of classic literature from my view, as they convey the image of religion created outside the Soviet era, outside the Soviet society. I paid special attention to the film leaders of Soviet film distribution, because the film leaders of the Soviet film distribution during the period of stagnation, for today, for example, in Russia, because in Ukraine we have our government have banned all this film, but for example, in Russia, in Belarus, in Moldova, in such post-Soviet countries, they are still cultural memes. And I will show you some movies which are well known in post-Soviet space. For the first time in documentaries, the topic of hypnosis and all kinds of divination appeared in the early 60s. Then esoteric practices were considered the best way to scientifically explain extraordinary phenomena. You know that in late 50s and 60s, during the Khrushchev period, two main reasons caused appear of those spiritual facts. On the one hand, this is a specific attention to the scientific development, so-called научно-технический progress, scientific and technological progress. On the the best example of which is the flight of Yuri Gagarin in April 1961. On the other hand, it was 50s and 60s when Khrushchev started the campaign of storming the heaven, Sturm Nebes, the biggest anti-religious campaign after the Second World War, or so-called Great Patriotic War. And the main goal of this campaign was a more active struggle against religion and all kinds of spirituality, except, of course, of spirituality, Soviet spirituality, so-called, but it's another topic. In 1961, documentary about hypnosis, it's called Hypnosis and Hypnosis Therapy, was released on the screen, and it was about the beneficial ways of researching hypnosis in psychiatry. In this film, they show a hospital where professors, with a wave of their hands, plunge alcoholic, heal hysterics, heal neurotics, and they plunge them into sleep. And of course, in sleep, they made them not to drink or not to have neurosis, so-called. And this was the first appear of the topic of extraordinary, so-called, in the Soviet popular screen. I didn't pay my attention, as I said, I didn't pay my attention on the underground cinematography. In the popular satiric magazine, a film magazine Fitil, the popular film actress Faina Ranevskaya played the role of a so-called fortune teller. I'm so sorry. There is oh, okay. This is a screen. This is a screen from the Hypnosis and Hypnotherapy, and the screen from the Fitil of 1964, where Faina Ranevskaya played the role of a fortune teller. And there is a very interesting approach to this kind of spirituality. The main character uses the cards in her so-called work, and to fulfill her promise to make the husband return to his wife, she called to the party partcom, the first level of the party committee in the plant. I think it was planned, and she insisted that he must return to his wife. Thus, with the help of the satire, the meaningless of mysticism and the universalism of party control are affirmed another time. The 1970s were marked for a small part of a population by conditions that Alexei, it's in Ukrainian, I'm sorry, Alexei Yurchak, we already told about him today. He called this, with the word of Mikhail Bakhtin, вне находимость, out of sight. In general, this the state of out of sight, вне находимость, is a state of acceptance of Soviet reality at the level of forms, but not contents. and the subject, which is in the state of the необходимость, out of sight, he recepts all the Soviet forms, for example, forms of mass culture, but not accept the content of it. The strategy of необходимость was especially widespread among the so-called 60s, шестидесятники, and intelligentsia, and the city intellectual workers. But I have to pay my attention. It's not about the cinema, but I have to pay my attention because it's one of the topic of my PhD thesis. In my native Eastern Ukraine, especially in my native Donetsk, there were some groups of people, so-called, they call themselves idealistic realists. And the first president of Ukraine, but those days, he was head of the propaganda and agitation department of Central Committee of the Communist Party of Ukraine, Leonid Kravchuk, focused to the need to counteract so-called idealistic realists with the mass culture. I don't know how they were supposed to do it, but in the official documents of the state archive of public organizations of Ukraine, there were some letters about the Donetsk group of so-called idealistic realists, which practiced yoga and mystical sentiments, they call it. Okay, but back to the topic. In general, the image of so-called non-standard religiosity, they called this all the new ages of occultist mysteries and esoterics those days in Soviet popular cinema can be divided into two main groups. First group is where mysticism as esotericism were pictured as a manifestation of pseudo-intellectuality. The most famous manifestation of this group is the character of Lyudmila Gurchenko in Vladimir Menshov's film Love and Doves, Любовь и голуби, 1984. It was strikingly popular in Soviet society, but also in some countries nowadays it's also very popular, and it has the first year of in cinema it had 44.5 million viewers. At first glance, an educated, high-ranking, single woman, Raisa Zakharovna, is the main antagonist of the film. And her tales about the humanoids, about the aliens, about the alternative medicine practitioners struck the native villager Vasily and became the reason for his passion for the intellect. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry for my English, really. For me, it's better to speak Ukrainian, of course. Interesting, very interesting, but absurdity of Raisa Zakharovna's stories does not scare Vasily away. They are very interesting to them, and all evidence of alternative methods of treatment in the movie was the proof of her high intellectual level. The connection between her intellectual level and her belief in this kind of in these types of spirituality are really very interesting. Another example of films from this group is Vladimir Bortko film, also 1984, The Blonde Around the Corner, Vladimka за углом. It was very popular also during the perestroika and the last years of stagnation, and you can see the number of viewers in cinema. And this one, the hero, performed by Andrei Mironov, is engaged in a fruitless search for aliens and for another civilizations. A scientific approach to this kind of phenomena adds a positivity to this image of the protagonist. You know, in this kind of films, all the images of scientific approach to this kind of esoteric is proof of the intellectual. But the second group of the film are the grotesque pictured of a naivety of these beliefs. Most often in such films, any non-religious spiritual practices are shown as a manifestation of stupidity, retrograde and childish. For example, in the film Lalka Ruslan and his friend Sanka, 1980, the boy convinces everyone that he has supernatural abilities of non-verbal suggestion. As a result, the guard, whom he tried to inspire with the idea of leaving his post, went to the toilet, which caused the guys to laugh and general understanding of futility and stupidity of such a practice. Another one example of this group of movies is also children's movie, Black and White Magic, 1983, in which the main idea is that there is no any magic except of friendship. And all the try of children to make magic tricks is an example of childish, not serious behavior. The contrast between these two groups of films are very clear. In first one, we can see spirituality as the evidence for the intellectual. And the second one, the spirituality as evidence of childish, non-serious behavior. I must pay my special attention to the high frequency of the topic of magic in the non-fantasy and non-fantastic movies for kids. Of course, on the one hand, it's quite understandable. Okay, this is a children's movie. Okay. But on the other hand, we can also see that the place of esoterical, of any kind of esoterical in Soviet Union and Soviet society especially, was on the margins of children's games. It's only about children, it's only about fantasy, but it's not about real life. So I can draw to the following conclusion. First of all, the topic of any kind of esoterical in Soviet cinematography is developed very poorly. Manifestation of magic, occultism, divination, yoga, connections with the extraterrestrial were much less than the mention of traditional religiosity, and much less the traditional, and the number was much less than traditional church and priests. The main motif in picturing priests in Soviet feature films was the antagonism between healthy Soviet society and religiosity. The New Age portrayal was less intense. I, for myself, can explain it by the fact that the main attention of the atheistic propaganda was directed to the fight against officially registered religious organization. Any manifestation of so-called mystical moods, as I quoted you, Leonid Kravchuk, which were not institutionalized, were not a priority for Soviet authorities. Thirdly, based on these New Age cults, which were very odd, bizarre, strange to the general Soviet public, to the Soviet society, have become even more marginalized in feature films. The emerging trends in the popularity of the new religiosity in society did not occur in the Soviet popular cinema until the late 80s. Quite interesting, just like the mystical, quite scientific practices of psychotherapy also was stigmatized. In the film, the most charming and attractive, Tatiana Vasilyeva's character Susanna was unable to find love for her friend Nadia using new scientific methods. One can see in this how dramatically the cinematographic images of scientific change are changing. Because, you know, in 60s, any mention about science made even the stupid, of course, in the eyes of Soviet authorities, any stupid mystical ideas, though такой, которая имеет право на существование. I'm sorry. But in the late 80s, even official science psychotherapy is also stigmatized in this kind of movement. The study of the reflection of all kinds of phenomena in Soviet popular cinema is a very perspective direction in modern historical science and religious studies. And this allows these images, allows us to consider the context of the topic more broadly and see new features of public perception of cultural phenomena. And I already